This is co-founder panel discussion. Welcome everyone again. Steve, go ahead because we have continued the same audience okay, this is a slide and it's you now. Go ahead, please.
All right. So I'd like to welcome our panel, and what I'll do is, obviously the audience all knows me now since I moderated the last panel, so I won't bother talking amongst anymore about myself. For the panelists that joined, I think all of you know me at least casually. So, my job here is to facilitate the conversation, and the way that we'll do this panel is I've got a handful of questions I want to ask. I've got one or two in reserve from the audience, and I suspect that the audience will probably filter some more questions through. If the audience doesn't have a lot of questions, I can just keep asking questions. Or Girish can start asking questions. Like, we won't have a problem keeping you busy until the end of the hour here. So we'll go for about 45, 50 minutes or so, just like the last session. But the last session, the time just flew by. So what I'll do real briefly is give everyone a minute or two just to quickly introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Ashwini. I'm looking on the slide deck, and I'll just move kind of on over. Take it away.
Sure. Hi, Steve. Hi, Girish. Thanks for the invitation. To start off with a little background, I'm Ashwini Kumar. I'm the general manager and country head at MPOWER Financing in India. MPOWER is a Washington, D.C. based startup. It's been in existence for close to 6 years and focus on educational loans. Here, I've roughly about 16 years of experience in financial services, and most of my roles have been either in startups, consulting, or focused on solving problems related to scaling, restructuring, realigning. I started my career in India with Tata Consultancy, went to the US for a business degree, and then worked my way through various organizations. Prior to coming to India, I think that was just last year, I was thinking about how I was researching a lot about the startup ecosystem in India and what would I do if I want to go back. And when I decided to come back, the education sector and the financial sector, I think the MPOWER, the way it positioned itself, seemed pretty lucrative. So I'm from Delhi, and when this offer came up in Bangalore, I think it was a great offer to pass. So not to pass, so I came down here. This is where I am.
Great. Pat, we'll switch over to you.
Hey, hi, this is Patan. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Mic check. Yeah. Hey, this is Patan. I'm the co-founder of the Walnut Personal Finance app. We are India's most loved personal finance app with more than 10 million users. We are now a part of Capital Float, which is a leading NBFC, digital NBFC lending company in India. And we do a bunch of things across the personal finance and lending space for consumers and small businesses. Yeah, that's it from me for now.
All right. And I'll go to Sumit.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to this panel, Stephen. Really great to be here. I'm Sumit. I'm the co-founder for Phable Care. And it's been a crazy journey for the last 2.5 years. We are India's largest chronic disease management company. We have beaten some of our close competitors in this space and have emerged as the largest. And I was previously a co-founder of another company which was acquired by CureFit. Otherwise, I've spent about 10, 12 years in various management consulting, technology consulting firms, and live my life all along in India, traveled to more than 40 countries. Would love to do that if I'm not a co-founder anymore, but hopefully that should change in 5-6 years' time.
Well, you also have the excuse of COVID right now, so you could be like, yes. All right,
Yeah.
Sometimes it gives a convenient excuse.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thanks again for giving us your backgrounds, and it gives the audience a little scope. When I was recruiting the panel and putting it all together, I wanted a diverse background, which I think we have. With different levels of company stages, right? Patan has been through an exit already. Sumit exit the previous company, right? So so where I'm looking for here is, in your view, what are the big challenges, like the top challenges that you faced, running operations or running the company in India, and where do you see those challenges changing in the future? and to scope it, what I mean by the challenges, like not to be super over-ended, like, is it a combination of, is capital scarce, was talent scarce, leave COVID out of it, obviously, but we can get to COVID a little later, right? But like, in general speaking, what are some of the key challenges, for doing a startup in India? Like, for example, if you asked me this question and I was a startup in Silicon Valley, I would say it's hard to get people to move here as much as people want to move here because there's no place to live. Well, pre-COVID, right? There was, we basically have, 100% occupancy. So real estate is very difficult and the cost of living is difficult. So what are some of those challenges in building a startup? And, is it cultural, that type of thing?
Yeah, maybe I can start
Anyone
on that.
Perfect.
Steve. Yeah. So I think, funding has always been a challenge, raising early stage capital, though it has changed in the last few years. In the last 5 or 7 years have been much better from a seed and a late stage capital. But I think getting the right kind of seed capital and the whole maturity of the ecosystem around funding and in terms of being able to raise capital for companies, I think it's, obviously it's where the market's at, where we are. That has been an ongoing challenge. And the other interesting thing is, while it has become easier to start companies in the last 5 years, it has also gotten more difficult to start companies, right? So while that's a bit of a contradiction, there are, like funding has eased out if you compare it with few years back, but at the same time, it's difficult. A lot of the ideas, I think Amey also touched upon it, a lot of the ideas have been built out. So the market is more mature in terms of what kind of consumer or B2B ideas you need to build out, right? Also, it's not an insular market like China, where you really have to think only about your country or your geography. And the competition is really Silicon Valley companies coming in, European companies coming in. So there is no, there is no inherent advantage of geography that we get in most areas, right? Unless it's a regulated or financial kind of area.
I would like to take a more comparative approach to this question. I think in general, like when I'm looking at timelines, right, the timing is good. And when I look at it, like how the evolution has been for the last few years, like a decade ago when I was trying to do a startup, I mean, barring large organizations, most others could face very common fundamental problems. I think something that Patanjali also alluded to, regulatory burden, right? Entry was not clean, permits, compliances, understanding volumes of legislation, tax codes. Without an expert, an entrant could not do it. And even with an expert, there was corruption and all those issues, right? A few years back, a friend and I, we set up something in the US with zero help and support. We could do it all by ourselves. We understood the tax codes, we understood what structure we needed, complete all documentation by ourselves. And with very minimal external support, we started the operations, ran it, did quite well, sold it. It was all easy and clean. And the third time for comparison is today, right? So when I compare it across time, right, I understand standalone, we still have some of these, issues, but there is also some significant improvements. Of course, all problems have not gone away, and reaching a US standard of some of setting up the startup or moving that forward, or even right now we are doing some changes in our own startup, right? And that is again a scalable issue of how the regulatory side works on that. So those kind of things still persist, but I think people today, they have a lot more access. There are tons of forums that teach you this stuff. And I think importantly, and including the internet, right, which comes right after oxygen and water and Maslow's hierarchy today, I think that helps play a part. And the other point I want to make, I think this also Padan referred to, is the sophistication of the market, right? I mean, a few years back, professional grade fundraising was definitely limited to mid-large organization, right? A small startup or new entrepreneur would either take the conventional loans or lean on friends or family, both of which positioned large issues. Now, the concept of angels and VCs was also pretty limited, and exposure to those networks was quite small and protected, right? Today, you throw a stone in any direction, Bangalore, you'll find the ecosystem ready, at least to clearly tell you where you stand. And a simple search online helps penetrate you through some of these forums, online learning tools and all. So I think I'm focusing this question from if a person has to start a startup or what are the early challenges from that standpoint. But needless to say, I think, again, when some advantages come, then the competition also comes along that as, so yeah, and I think it still persists from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think my fellow panelists have already covered most of it. From my point of view, I think one of the what I have faced as primarily two challenges while starting up the last one and this one. Obviously, funding maturity has been, there have been various cycles of funding maturity in India. 2015-16, you had a PowerPoint, you could get the money. You just go and pitch. You potentially would get 200K to start with. You might not get a million after that, but you will definitely get a 200K check. Right now, I think the market has matured. No one is going to give you money just based on slides. You need to definitely put some traction in place, something in place to kind of get it going. And at least that level of maturity, it has. I think we have got to that level of maturity. I do feel that in terms of that bridge capital, those pre-Series A and Series A, there is definitely a gap. So while early stage, capital is definitely available a lot in India, the bridge capital between a large growth stage company from the inflection point of product market fit to growth, I think there the capital is missing, and it's not missing primarily because people don't want to invest. I think what has happened is in the first 10 years, people have actually burnt a lot of money in funding non-fundable or not a lot of EBITDA positive model. So I think that has really taken a hit on the sentiment in the market on funding for a very long time. And I think in general, while a lot of people still understand in early stage that returns could be difficult, but a lot of people actually still expect the returns to come out in 4 years, even at early stage. Where if you really compare US market, etc., most early stage funds never even have a horizon of 3 years or something. All of them tend to end up having a horizon of 7 to 10 years. And I think that really speaks about, a lot about the maturity of the ecosystem here. The second is, even if you had money, I think finding talent has become really, really tough. You need, as the company kind of grows at early stage, you need people who are aligned with the founders, who understand that they are going to take a haircut. For example, at Phable Care, the first 10 employees who joined, all of them took 50 to 60% haircut. Now, you really don't find that kind of people so easily in India who are willing to take a haircut in their salaries before they, join a startup. So they really need to believe in the vision and join. So that's a very different stage of the company. Once you get growth capital and you start putting money, and you need more, people who come with operational excellence in execution, I think it becomes really tough finding some of those people too. Specifically, your leads for specific functions, it does become a lot challenging in finding those leads who would not have an MNC mindset, who should have a startup mindset, but function like an MNC. So it's a bit of a dichotomy in hiring those set of people. So I do feel that these challenges exist. Third thing, while India is considered to be the tech capital of the world, finding good engineers is a problem, right? I'm not sure how many people have really faced it, but good engineers are really hired at top companies like Amazon, Flipkart, and you name all of them. Unfortunately, as a early stage startup, you may not be able to give that kind of money, and someone has to really believe in the vision to join you to basically put the output. So those were my challenges essentially.
Yeah, and what's interesting, the three of you, like tying together what all of you said, because you all did say some things that are quite similar, but then you all made different points that all complemented each other. Is what I hear is having the privilege of having grown up in New York and then spent a good amount of time in Hong Kong, and then later in my career moved to Silicon Valley. I've watched the New York in the 90s and the Hong Kong in the 2000s ecosystems develop, and then came to Silicon Valley, which this ecosystem was already developed. And a lot of what you're describing are like the growing pains of an ecosystem. So that's the good news. But when I first got to Silicon Valley 7 or 8 years ago, everyone was talking about the Series A gap here, right? And that's just a combination of capital flowing into VC funds, bigger checks, things like that. But actually, one of the things that Sumit mentioned that I would like to kind of present back to the panel, because it's almost like he knew my cheat sheet of the questions I wanted to ask, was about the talent. Back in Hong Kong 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, I ran an accelerator. And when the people that came to the accelerator, they said it was very hard for them to attract talent because the culture in Hong Kong was, you go to study hard at school, you go get a degree, you then become a doctor or a lawyer, or you work at the bank, or you get a big white collar job, right? Going to a startup was almost like a sign of failure. And a guy who founded a startup, I mean, this is anecdotal, but like he founded a startup, and when he would go to the bars, he wouldn't tell girls that he worked at a startup, because that was code for being unemployed. He would lie and say he worked at the bank, right? So what is it, to expand on, Sumit mentioned that talent was a little bit of a pain point. I'd like to, to hear, we'll let you go last on this one, Sumit. So Ashwini and Patan first. You guys can choose which one, but what are your thoughts on, and I know, Ashwini, I know you have a pretty big operation, right? What's it like to recruit talent? What are some of the cultural challenges, and how has it changed, and how do you see it changing, in your stances for that?
Yeah, sure. I think, as Sumit pointed out, right, despite being the tech capital of the world, I think we still, we come across a lot of basic tech challenges, like, hey, they'll have fancy names, they'll have fancy degrees and great experience, but when it comes to actual execution, we run into challenges. I think more so than that, when we're trying to, I think there are various agencies trying to put India on the global map and continuing to put that and even scale that further. Individual organizations are also trying to compete at a global market, and as Padan said, not insular anymore. I think it does come into a little bit of the cultural challenges as well, right? I mean, really small, petty things like people are constantly late for interviews, right? I mean, despite the fact that moves them with the best benefits, you get the best perks and all of that stuff. But I mean, I think those are things for which, you are understanding for quite some time, and then you start, draining on patience at some point, right? So I think the competition is definitely fierce, right? And especially being in some of the major metropolis hubs can be an advantage for having access to talent, but there's also that stiff competition in the markets from both sophisticated large organizations and well-funded startups, right? There's also that caveat in the startup segments as well. So for startups, this should still be a good problem to solve, because startups need people who can understand the issues and inner working style of a startup, the flexibility, the ownership, and the self-discipline approach. And we focus a lot of that during the interview process, but that's hard, right? It's very tangible to look at that, even if somebody has a startup experience. So to have that kind of a mindset and attitude works a lot, but having trained in another startup poses a much stronger advantage. And while we may flip the same argument in a tier 2 or tier 3 cities like Indore, Pune, Coimbatore, Lucknow, Ahmedabad, they've really changed the argument due to access to capital, talent, and excellent educational institutions and the competitive infrastructure, right? So making talent's choice for better quality of lifestyle, more diverse. So I think the talent is it's still a competitive market for, and I think increasingly getting more competitive in that sense. In fact, in the last quarter itself, I've seen I think 6 or 7 pitch decks from tier 2, tier 3 cities. So geographic competition is also there, apart from I think some of the challenges.
Wanting you to locate your operations there.
Yeah, it's better quality of lifestyle, but also for the employees. At the same time, they have a lot of competitive perks on that front. So from our standpoint, especially because we have a very aggressive plan for hiring for next year, I think we are focusing on what are the internal benefits, right? And how much more effort we can put upfront on the recruiting to minimize the pains, right? Because, whether they are coming from organized setups or startups, I think people end up being very fluid to small differences in pay, small differences in, I didn't think about it, but I think my wife has got a job 3 months after he's got a job with us, like in another location. So we want to minimize some of those impacts. I think COVID work from home has also helped. We offer work from home too, but in general, this has also helped for us to broaden the scope from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think first of all, Pune is tier 1 from a startup and tech perspective. So anyway,
this is a Pune sponsored event. Yes.
Yeah. So one thing, the Hong Kong example that you gave, right, Stephen, it's very interesting, right? So in 2000, so one of the big things that's happened in the ecosystem in India is that the fear of startups has gone away, right? So while the ecosystem develops and funding happens, fear has gone away. So in 2000, if you were like coming out of college, I'm going to do a startup. Parents would be like, go get a job in Infosys, right? You're not going to get married. Whereas if you look at it now, you find that the acceptance overall is much more. Students coming out of, in fact, there are students starting startups when they are studying, coming out of college and doing stuff. And overall, it's become, there are a lot of success stories in terms of people who have made, who have been part of successful startups. And because of that, that stigma is not there anymore in terms of having to join a startup, right? It is difficult to hire a startup employee when you have like giants like the Amazons and the Flipkarts, etc. But I've always believed that, you need a small team at a startup, at least in the early stages. You need a team that really believes in the mission. And it's really like an enterprise sales job to get someone on board, right? You cannot recruit like the larger companies, and you cannot obviously offer the stability that a larger company can offer. And for someone who's looking for that, they're better off doing that than being with you, right? Your job is to find that 1%. You're a 1%, 2% company. Your job is to find that 1%, as a founder, to find that 1%, 2% set of engineers who are, committed to the mission, and find out what it is about their, mission in life that aligns with what you're trying to do, right? And it could be different stuff. For someone, it would be work crazy hours and really learn new tech. For someone else, it could be just be part of a rocket ship, right? You have to dig out those people and hire them. So, I don't think it's going to get easier for startups to hire people, just because the kind of people you're looking for are a much smaller sample from the larger engineer base, right? So it's always going to be like a tough one. The real problem is there are too many startups, and a lot of them are funding, and then the salaries are going sky high.
Which is the problem we have in Silicon Valley. Actually,
right.
The problems, both you and Ashwani's problems, like, we have Google, Facebook, but then we also have before their IPOs, Uber and Lyft, so the smaller early startup is difficult, right? And then
that is a challenge, getting in this 1 or 2% engineering and product management and marketing base. There's just a lot of startups because of the way the ecosystem is growing. So it's getting tougher and tougher. But I mean, that's I think 50% of founders' job is to build a team, right? So.
Agree.
Yeah.
And,
I would just say, Stephen, I was just say,
you started this.
That I think, the Hong Kong example is slightly reversed now in India. So I believe that if someone is really going into a bar today and is talking to the person that they are interested in, and they say that they are working in a startup, most likely, they are going to hit it off. So it's
same in Hong Kong now, 12 years later from my original story.
So I think perception has changed a lot. At least that's the reality for startup hubs like potentially even Pune. I've not been to Pune, but definitely for Bangalore and Delhi and Bombay, where definitely the entire perception among the younger lot has actually changed. And people are actually doing startups, even as someone mentioned, in the last or second year or third year of their college. And I think in that sense, that has really come up. For example, I think there has been an exact story which has been in sports in India. No parent wanted their child to be a sports person in the 90s, right? But post 2005, and I think IPL kind of changed the game forever. Where today every parent in India wants their children to be a sports star, or somebody, somebody who takes sports seriously. And it's not frowned upon if you're not focusing on your studies, but you are excelling in your sports. I think that perception has changed. I think a lot of our generation who are having children, I think that is essentially going to be carried forward. So I think, I think that transition has happened, and I think it will continue to seep through in tier 2, tier 3 markets too. But coming to challenges, as Ashwini and Patanjali, mentioned, and I think they mentioned correctly that you creating that first 10-member team or your founding team beyond co-founders is the most critical team, and it requires, I think, all the founders' capability to attract people, to to tell them what the vision that they are all in together. I think that really, I think you have to first sell to your first 10 employees or first tell 10 co-founders. You have to first sell it to them before you go out and sell it to anyone else, whether it is consumers or B2B audience. And I think that's, one of the biggest founder skills. somebody did put a question, how do you select a co-founder, or what is some of these things? I can tell you that as a co-founder, you need to be able to do everything in a company when you start, right? Whether if you're a technology company, you need to be able to write code. You can't say, I'll hire 5 engineers to write code. I'm telling you, in India, it may not function because you may not even find 5 people to write code for you at the money that you might be able to spend. So that's the hard reality of it, of starting up. So talent attraction, being able to convince them is one of the key roles of the co-founders, not just the founder, but the co-founders, all of them put together.
Well, I'm glad you saw that. I'm glad you saw that question in the Q&A, because I actually wanted to kind of then start transitioning into that, right? Because I think that's the next extension of the talent, right? Is in the three of yours opinion, attracting talent and attracting a co-founder might be a little different. Are there differences? Like, as you mentioned some right there, right? And what is it like attracting a co-founder in India? Like, is it easy? Is it hard? And then what are some of the things, I think you already started hitting on it, Sumit, like some of the desirable features would definitely be obviously development. But what are some of the other types of features you'd want from that kind of founding team in a startup? And I might even jump in and give my opinion depending on what you guys say, because this is a topic it's near and dear to me as a 5-time founder myself, but not all at once. I'll start calling on you if no one jumps in first. Patan's going to jump in.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you can actually find a co-founder, right? So if you look at most of the successful co-founding teams, they have had some past history. Either been in college together or worked together, had an idea, met through a social circle, understood each other, and then set out, right? I'm not aware of any really successful cases where it's a case of one person set out to find a co-founder for what they wanted, right? You could build out a co-founding team, but I think by the very definition of the word, you are either a co-founder or you're not. And then you can be part of the founding team. You could be a key part of the founding team. You could be like, you couldn't come in and be the CEO of the company, run the company and not be the co-founder, right? You could have all of that, but the co-founders are the co-founders. You either co-found it or you don't co-found it. That's kind of the learning I've had over the last, and that may be a very polarizing view.
I guess what I'm hearing though is you either started the company together. So it's not like you found a co-founder. It's like two people had an idea, but you quit your jobs together and go do it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Something like that, right? Or you were in college together, you had an idea, you met up and you said, hey, let's do this together. You have some kind of relationship to start off with outside, and then you gel together and build something. I mean, that may be a very polarizing view, but that's what I think.
I like it. I like difference of opinion.
Yeah, it's a good view. Yeah.
I believe that there have been some camps, etc. I know that there are a couple of accelerators, etc. in Singapore who match co-founders. So you can, you go there by invitation. If you have certain kind of talent and so on and so forth, you can go there, speak to a bunch of people, find your co-founders, or you can potentially go to a lot of these events where people are looking for ideas or looking to join something or click somewhere, right? But I will agree with Patan over here that most of the successful teams that at least that I have seen in India are the ones who had some history. Either they would have worked together or they would have spent time in college together. At some point, you just don't find someone immediately and say, this is the person I want to start the company with. I think that's rare. If something like this has happened, I would say that's rare in India. And I think one of the most important things in finding a co-founder, I think you can still do that. Ultimately, the bottom line is how comfortable are you with the other person, right? And the other person is in it with you for the same reasons that you are in it for, right? And if any of you are in it only for the money, then I'm telling you upfront that it will not work.
Run.
So it has to be a fair amount of pain point which you suffer, which potentially could bring two very different people who have never met together, on a journey. That could definitely happen where I say, yes, it's the same pain point that I'm facing, that you are facing, and let's do something about it. But ultimately, there has to be some gel factor. And two founders coming together and saying that we will make $20 million in 2 years' time, and we'll go home to the bank laughing, that's unlikely to work. So ultimately there has to be a lot of comfort between co-founders. You might discover someone at a startup event, etc. But ultimately, it will all be defined by how comfortable you are with the other person, and to be able to take this as a journey. Because I'm telling you, your co-founder becomes your life partner. Because sometimes, if you have another life partner, they will be envious of you on how if you're not spending enough time. That is my my life story. I'm spending more time with my co-founder, and my life partner is envious that I don't spend enough time with her and I'm spending it with my co-founder. So all this is practical, but I don't know if you find a co-founder. I don't know what's the right answer to that. I'm not sure, because I have not heard somebody finding a co-founder.
I tend to agree. Ashwini, do you want to jump in with this? Because you've hired a lot of people, but not necessarily at the co-founder level, right?
Well, I did have a small short-run startup in the US, and I think I don't think I can add anything to what Sumit and Patan have said, but I'll take a slightly different spin on the question. If the intent of asking this question is like, is it like, try to identify the intent, right? Is it based on, hey, I'm not confident if I can run things on my own, so maybe then look for a mentor or a coach or somebody who can start hand-holding you up to a point and help you learn the tricks and tips of the world, right? So I think look at it from that standpoint. Ideally, if you don't have a co-founder, maybe look at it like, hey, you're not sharing any more equity, right? So go solo and enjoy that. I think if it's a more from the framework of I need additional help and support, then maybe think about sharing your idea, in whichever way you are able to, without spilling out all the secret sauce, with a couple of your friends. See who's getting passionate, who do you trust. Maybe start by sourcing some small chunks of help, and whoever is willing to go in the whole swing. Maybe you have to do a lot of evaluation, and I think somebody put in transparency and trust are very important and vital, and Sumit said you spend a whole lot of time, right? So if that is a person, and maybe over time you will feel it, know it. So hopefully that helps some of the background to the question, if that was even related.
No, absolutely does.
Yeah,
and
just
then,
to add a bit, Steve,
please.
if I could. Yeah. So I was just like,
Please.
so while I agree that while I know that it's not like you can go and find a co-founder, but it's very, you can make your founding team feel like they are co-founders by empowering them and by giving them substantial amount of equity so that they feel ownership in the company. And I think that is the next best step to if you have the lack of a co-founder in a certain area, then building a founding team and really empowering them ownership wise, aligning with what they want, and equity really makes a person feel that they are part of that journey, right? So that's one way you could kind of bridge the co-founder gap.
Yeah, and I think that's something around here we take for granted. I joke, but it's true. I said everyone in Silicon Valley has a neighbor that they think they're smarter than, but that neighbor is a millionaire because they joined like Facebook or Apple or Google, as an engineer 20 years ago, and now has this big house, right? And they're like, whoa, well, if he can do it, I can do it, right? So everyone here values equity, and I think ecosystems, it takes time to value that equity, and I think that's starting my first couple startups in New York City, they didn't necessarily value the equity. They wanted the high salary because they could have went to go work in a bank or something, right? So it seems like in India, people are starting to value equity at this point, finally, or
yeah. They have started, right? If you look at even in Bangalore, if you look at it, just the fact that Flipkart after so many years got acquired by Walmart, was a big deal for the overall ecosystem, because you had so many people coming out where the ESOPs were valued. There were so many coming out that invested and started angel investment, and just overall it lent a lot of publicity to the fact that startups can do equity well, and ESOPs are valuable. I think the previous watershed event that happened like this was when Infosys went public, right? So that was not really a startup from what we think of today, but it started out as a small company, it became a large services company, and then a lot of employees made money when the stock actually listed. I think the Flipkart has been, like, in the startup world, has been a similar kind of watershed event for us here.
Yeah, I've always made the argument that that's what it takes, right? For an ecosystem to start developing, is for people to understand the value of equity, right? And it usually takes a big exit, right? And then those folks also become investors themselves, and then those other people want to start working at companies that are very similar.
Yeah, I want to echo Patan's sentiment. I think when we, like any other organization, have the windfall gains, we have seen the teams really think how it comes together, because we offer equity as well, so options. So I think from that standpoint, we can see that cohesive gel of thinking, and for the organizational, I mean, even at the strategic level. So I think that definitely adds a lot of value from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And taking this kind of one step a little further is when you're recruiting. So let me tell you a very fast story. Fresco, I'm on the board of one of our companies, and I was just talking to the founder the other day. They had some big issues with their rollout, and he asked at very short notice his team to work over the weekend, and the customer success team. And there was so much pushback and complaining, and he would call me. He goes, "What do I do? Like, they're not startup people." Right. And I said, well, you have to start, it's your job now as a leader. Like, you hired, unfortunately, you probably hired people that you thought were startup people that, quote, were startup people and weren't. Now it's your job as a leader to go get them comfortable with that. But you also have to then respect the fact that it's going to be a transition. Right. And then the good news for him is he should be able to help them with that transition, and he should also be able to augment with future hires, lots of more, startup people. Right. How is that in your, what I call second level, right? Like, you have your founding team, not necessarily co-founders, but that first core team. When you start expanding and hiring that next level of people, what's the environment like in India? Still for fairly early stage startups to go attract that second level of talent that understand how startups work. I think Sumit, I see you went off mute, so I'll let you go first as well. But I think you hit the nail on the head and you said, like, don't come to the startup immediately for the money, right? Because you're not gonna be able to match what, Infosys is paying or someone else, right?
Yeah. No, I think, if I think your early network actually helps you get the first few people who will work with you, right? And I can tell you that I actually hired my engineering manager because of Fresco. So one of the, and this example is that Titus, who is my managing partner, who did the deal for us. Fresco had invested in a company called education startup in the US, and it had got acquired. And this gentleman was actually coming back to India, and we interviewed him. Fresco made the connection. We interviewed him. He understood what does it mean to work in a startup, first of all, right? And what does it mean to have an equity in a startup, right? And ultimately, that it has to be a hands-on approach. Even though he was leading the engineering function in this education company, but ultimately he knew that it has to be fairly hands-on. He can't just come in, create a team and then essentially guide it from the top. That's not how startups function. So I think your early references really work a lot of magic, where your network, and if you reach out to the right set of people within your network, they actually point you to the right set of people who could potentially become your early founding set, or your second level of founding team. And obviously then it's once you have made that connect, ultimately you need to give out that magic to these people. You need to be able to convince them why is it, how can they benefit from this entire story, and what is it that they are going to create as part of what your vision is. And I think that conversation is very important. I remember some of my initial hires. I think first 50 hires that we had at Phable, I actually ended up interviewing about, I think, 49 of them. Probably there was just one who I did not interview, probably because of lack of time or I was not available. But about 49 interviews I took, and all of the interviews ended up being 3.5 hours each. And it was not about that I was interviewing them. It was more like a conversation, that what we are trying to do over here and how they can contribute. And I think that you cannot do it like a 45-minute interview or a 1-hour interview. It has to be a free flowing conversation from both ends, where you are trying to understand what's the complexity that the other person has. Are they facing some real life challenges where they might not be able to accept below a certain threshold of money? How do we kind of bridge that gap to where he or she is comfortable, versus but not that we are not making them millionaires at the start. So all of these conversations need to be done, and pretty transparently. You need to be quite upfront that, dude, I can't pay this much, right? And this is what you are in it for. If you are in it, then this is what can be done. And I think that those kind of transparent, Q&A or a discussion really helps hiring the first set of people. And they really need to be aligned with you, because if they are not aligned, essentially you are not building anything. Nothing will go out, no product will be made, no consumers will come, no users will come, or whatever you are trying to do, nothing will happen. I think spending that time is very, very important. Building your first 5, 7, 10 member team is very, very important. And largely it comes from network. It rarely comes from, trying to, put hiring companies or recruitment companies help you recruit, because you will not find it in the recruitment network from recruitment agencies.
Okay, continue, please.
Yeah. I just want to add to that. Definitely agree with what Sumit said. And adding to that, I think beyond that stage also, like for example, even we are 6 years in, we don't want to leave that startup mindset, because it's been super beneficial for every rifts and tides. And I think until there's a big critical threshold, so I think everybody has to have that startup mindset. Even for large organizations, I think that should be there, like having a startup mindset, that ownership, sense of responsibility, not being in for the money, right? Something more, right? Money is important, but there's something more to it as well. So that has to be there. I mean, 20, 40, 50, I mean, unless the recruitment team is feeling, hey, we are all good to go, I think we should have that for the long term. So I think scaling from that 7 to 50 and 50 to 100, that mindset should definitely not go away. And I think that's an important quality, to have an asset, which plays out really well. So I think for scale, if there's a problem, then continue to hire the startup mindset people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what both of them have said. I think that, when you look at compensation, money is not the only form of compensation. Is something that needs to be really figured out with the candidates that are trying to pull in. And really, compensation is a form of respect that you give the person, right? So the idea is you respect their skills, you respect their ability to come and join you, you respect the fact that they'll be able to build a good team, and they will add value to you, and you add value to them as an organization, right? And that is the story really that you have to lay out. First, 40-50, just like Sumit mentioned, right? It's a very founder-driven reference and network kind of build that you have to do. You really can't do anything else. And I would say, like, after 50-75, you should sell the company and not get into the next problem, right? So that's one way of looking at how to scale beyond that. But the first 50 to 75 is, very, very founder and reference focused within your network. And it gets easier after the first 15, right? Because the excitement that you can impart to the first 15 is what they communicate to their network and pull people in.
Yeah, and then you're a little more established too. It's a little less risky.
Right. Culture is underrated as a compensation tool. The difference that a startup culture has. Empowerment is underrated as a tool, because young engineers really like to build stuff that goes out and does impact in the world. There are a bunch of things beyond money that we underestimate as pulls for someone. Of course, there's like a base amount that you can't go below, but beyond that, options to show, it could be opportunities to talk to customers at a young age of your career. All of those are very interesting for people to figure out, right? So they're all on the table, really.
Okay, we're going to start bringing in some of the questions from the audience, and then also one logistical note. We still got some little time left, but being in the morning in here, my family's going to start. I'm going to switch locations, so I'm going to mute for a second, but I'm going to ask the question first. So it's not that I've gone away. I'm going to just change locations in the house. Conferences under COVID, right? So, thinking, you've been talking about compensation for equity. I'd like to hear your guys' opinion on, specifically, how you think equity can be distributed, amongst that early founding team, and even like your ESOP and your, for those in the audience, your employee stock option plan, right? Your ESOP, moving forward, how easy is it to do here in India, but also at the same time, like what type of numbers could somebody even expect if they're joining a company that's early stage or well established? And as you guys are talking, I will move. So Girish, you might have to do some moderating just in case for like 60 seconds.
Oh yeah, no problem. Go ahead, please.
I would say that, if you are starting with a founding team and you've figured out who you guys are aligned on what really needs to be done. And my thought process could be very different from Patan and Ashwini. But my thought process is that you shouldn't be you shouldn't be too greedy about how much equity you have, right? And I think it's very important that you recognize what the other person brings to the table, and essentially make sure that they are equal partners or made feel that they are respected for what they are coming in for. I've seen a lot of founding teams saying that one of the key founders is 95% equity and the other founder is 5% equity. I'm not sure how those founding teams, founders really go beyond, and try to build bigger companies, because I've not really seen a lot of cases where such companies have gone bigger. Because ultimately, at some point, once, let's say, investors come in, if the second or the third co-founder are feeling that they are too small in the company to be able to contribute, then because liquidation will happen to your equity and you're too small to contribute, the intent and purpose of having a founding team will ultimately get lost away. So, and I've also seen that a lot of times founders come and say, we are putting money, so we are the dominant founder, and hence I would take 80 or 90% of the equity. No, you might be bringing cash to the table, but probably the skill is entirely someone else's. And one of the mistakes that also happen in India a lot is that you only bring in a founder for their skill and not for their money. I think it is important that, at least in India, is that the initial capital, whatever is required, founding teams contribute, right? And they may not contribute equally, but founding teams need to contribute to that initial capital required. It actually shows skin in the game, and what you're potentially going to build as a vision, which is a combined vision, not one person's vision. That is very, very important. And one of the things that I'll recommend to everyone is, which we did not do, but I would recommend to everyone in the future, and obviously we paid the price for it, so it's hard learned lesson, is that even if you are starting out with a 50-50, or if 3 founders are there or 4 founders are there, whatever be the ratio, right, or whatever you have decided, do break it down into 3-year or 4-year distribution of your equity, which means that if you are holding 50% equity in the in your company, essentially every year will help you get 12.5%. Do break it out, because you always have situations where some of the early founders may leave the company, right? Because at some point the vision doesn't align, or the teams break up. And in such a scenario, you should have the ability to bring in someone else to replace the founder. So it's very, very important that you kind of break it out. And if you are doing that, at your end, then you would not find yourself in trouble that I've given too much equity to someone, but ultimately they have not worked out. I think that's one of the biggest fears for people. And the way to counter it is by, tranching out the equity based on the, number of years someone has spent.
Yeah, I mean, basically be generous with the equity when it comes to the founding team and key members. Build out a vesting plan, just like Sumit mentioned, and protect equity when you are doing VC rounds. That's really the methodology there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have this conversation. It's interesting that the our conversation today has kind of shifted in this, talent and equity, because that it seems to dominate the conversations I have with the companies after we invest. We seem to, the struggle to hire the right talent and grow the team. The founders always seem, when we make an investment as a VC, the founders are the domain experts. I don't need to teach you about your market. Like I wouldn't be investing in your company if you weren't a domain expert, and our founders, tend to be expert business operators, right? Or they, again, wouldn't be founders. Where they struggle is growing the team and then figuring out co-founder disputes and equity disputes, things like that. We have Ashwan, I don't know if you want to jump in before I have one last question that's kind of amalgamated from the audience around all that.
No, I think all the right answers have been said. So
cool. Yeah. There's 1 or 2 other questions. In kind of to summarize, as this will be our penultimate question, because I have a fun question at the end, and you probably know what it is if you saw the last session. It would be something like that, a COVID question. But here in Silicon Valley, and this actually kind of gleaned from questions from the audience, but I'm merging it in with it. I think is, there was this notion a couple of years ago, if you were like hanging out at startup conferences, and even VCs and everyone else would say this, like, your ideal founding team at an early stage was, I cringe even hearing this, a hacker, the hipster, right, and the hustler, right, so like theoretically that would be like, a developer, a biz dev person, and then like a salesperson, a developer and like a designer-y hipster and a salesperson. Like, I don't know how true that is, but like that was for a few years, that's what people were saying. I don't necessarily agree. Sumit kind of threw out when we started down this thread, every founder should code, right, kind of thing. As our last kind of technical question, right, before we start wrapping up, is what do you feel, from a talent perspective, is, what should your early team, not necessarily founder, right, your first handful of people, what should they be in a startup? And then, what do you prioritize after that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the kind of startup you're trying to build, right? So I completely agree with Sumit. If it's a tech-based startup, you need someone in the founding team who can own the technology going ahead, right? It could be a financial startup. You got to talk to a lot of banks, build up relationships with the fintechs. Then you need your founding team needs to have that, right? So I don't necessarily. I mean, the one designer, one tech, and one business pattern. I don't think that's really important. Your co-founders. You need to have complementary skills with your co-founder, right? It could be anything, but if you have complementary skills and complementary interests, maybe, then that works out very well. Doesn't have time. You can always go and find the tech part of the founding team or the business part of the founding team, right? Like in Walnut, me and my co-founder, we are more tech than business, right? So we went and built out a business team. Whereas the company which acquired us, both the co-founders are business people, right? And it's a finance lending company with a lot of technology, but they built a technology team, right? And now kind of all four of us are complementary in that sense. So I think it depends. It's a cliched answer, but it really depends in this case.
I actually think it's a pretty good answer.
It's a good answer. Yeah.
It's the truth. How about that? It's cliche, but sometimes cliches are true. At least in my opinion.
I think some time back, Patan had mentioned that, one of the incentives for a lot of the younger talent is now that they're able to do a lot of projects, where in other organizations, they may not be meeting the client or taking on some large scale projects and all. I think similar to that, piggyback on that notion, right? I mean, this role should be, anybody in the founding team or even the first one or two levels of first 10 employees, they should be willing to do everything. Like they are the HR, they are the legal, they are the tech, they are everything, right? So wherever the need is there, they should be able to jump in, solve fires and wanting to be able to, solve it. And that's going to be really helpful as the organization is growing and they want to grow with the organization. That's one incentive that people also have, that, hey, I want to grow with the startup because that'll be a faster path to progress. So unless they learn a multitude of skills, and by doing those projects, I think it's going to be challenging if they're not willing to get their hands dirty in anything, like, make tea, because for the 10 people employees. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and before we give Sumit the last word on this, since we have to wrap up in a second, I do want to interject and agree very strongly with Ashwini, is because she hit on one of like a very emotional point for me. Is I argue, like, in the early stage when you're 2-3 people, like, you should even have titles. Your title should be co-founder or just startup person, like, on your business card if you have one, or on LinkedIn, right? Working at startup. Only start thinking of titles after you have like 10 people, like, kind of a thing. And even there, the title should be pretty loose because you have to do everything, right? And if you remember before, we were talking about the startup person and Sumit was going about this, then I told the story as, the way you figure out, I'm assuming what came in those 3-hour conversations, Sumit, and I'm going to hand it over to you in a second, is figuring that out. Is this person dynamic enough? Can this person adapt? Will they, I don't want to hire someone just to do accounting. Like, I want to hire someone that can do 10 other things, right? Kind of a thing. So Sumit, I'll give you the last word on this topic, and then I'll ask one fun question, then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. So my thing is very similar to what Stephen and Ashwini and Patan have said, is that it's the you need to have complementary skills. That's quite important. But at the same time, if you do have some skills, if you don't have some skills, you don't need to go and find a founder who has that skill. You can potentially build that skill within one of the co-founders, or you can find that skill in your early founding team. So that's something you can definitely do. So don't think, I don't advise anyone to think that we both are techies. What should we be doing once we have built the technology? Who will go and sell? I think it is important that you go and sell it initially, because you will otherwise never find out that the great tech that you have built, quote unquote, is actually going to work for any user or not. So it's important that you have to do that job. You have to go and sell to the first few customers, and you have to find out from them. So it's very important that you build some skills, even if you don't have, over a period of time, because they are only going to help you understand what really it takes and what do you need to get in someone, who you are hiring. So what traits are you really looking for? Unless you do it yourself, you would never be able to hire or give the right kind of vision to the incoming person.
Yeah, I mean, that vision definitely comes from the example really comes from the executive team flowing down for sure, right? Like I make the argument that startup CEOs, like back when we had offices, were the ones that had to make sure there was enough toilet paper in the office, right? They had to make sure there was enough, tea in the office, that kind of stuff too, right? So it's not just the glamour of speaking at a conference like this, right? People see the three of you up here and think, the startup, running the startup is very glamorous, but I think, people all said otherwise in some shapes and forms. Before we kind of wrap up the entire event, and I appreciate folks staying up super late. If you've noticed, the sun has come up in my world, so we're in different parts of the world. One last question to the audience, lightning round is, assuming COVID goes away, pandemic goes away, what's the first thing you want to do? Right, quick, lightning round. We'll start with you, Patan.
Yeah, I do a lot of wildlife and wildlife photography, so I'm going to just go and visit every wildlife reserve in India when that happens. I've been missing it this year a lot.
I'm going to go up. So I'm going to go up. I'm just actually closing a funding round. I'm super tired in the last 7-8 months. I'm exhausted. I need to go to a beach. That's my break.
You mean see some nature, not look at it through a screen, Ashwani?
Well, I was recently in Goa, so I can't do that anymore. But I don't restrict myself from that. But I think I would definitely control myself from eating out too much, which is a big.
It can be hard.
Yeah. The other big thing is I think in the recent past I've let go of myself on COVID, but I think I'd definitely love to get back to meeting the team and having nice lunch with them, because I'm sure all of our organizations, all of the employees, they're like, hey, when do we get together? It was great, productive few months, but and that those interactions will help, connecting with partners, friends, family, right? I have a lot of external family we don't meet. So we would love to do some of that too.
Yeah, I feel like everyone I know, my wife included, and my wife's office is only a mile away from our house. And, we feel like it's easy to work from home. Easy. I mean, you just saw what I had to do. Like I had to go upstairs, downstairs, right? That kind of thing. But at the same time, it's the interaction, right? Like we really need for collaborative, for team building. We all want to see each other again. So that makes sense. All right. So with that, we're going to conclude the panel. I'd like to thank all three of you. Virtual clap from everyone. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry. Thank you for your answers. Thank you to the audience for some of the questions that we used. And then, of course, just thanks for your time. I know it's late. I made a joke, I think, is what else is there to do, during COVID, when I recruited you. But I know you're taking time away from your family, Sumit, and you even mentioned it, right? Like as founders, like this is part of the job, unfortunately. And like I do know you had a choice to spend time with your significant others and all the other things. So I appreciate spending yet one more hour in front of Zoom during COVID. So I thank you again and hope to see you in person at the event next year.